The lengths people go to regain control of someone's life, it's absolutely ridiculous at this point. I just don't get it. Hi friends, welcome back to another true crime episode. I'm Faiza, and every week I talk about a true crime story, a documentary I've watched, a horror film I've watched, whilst I get unready with you guys. So if you're interested in true crime, do like and subscribe, and happy spooky season. So today's story, it's all kinds of crazy. John Anderson, he just couldn't let go. This man grew up in a very healthy, stable home, and yet there is something that he could not control: other people. So let's get into the details. So major trigger warning on today's case. This video has themes of stalking, domestic violence, abusing a corpse. It's all bad, so viewers' discretion is advised. So I was thinking, why do people stalk? Like, where does this behavior really stem from? And I did some research. Stalking is widely recognized as a connection between trauma and obsessive behaviors. So John, he excused his stalking behaviors on abandonment issues. He didn't want people that he loves to leave. He couldn't handle the change. He couldn't handle other people regaining control of their lives or holding back their energy. He just wanted things to remain the same. But life doesn't work like that, and it's all change, you know? He said, and I quote, he gets hung up on people and he can just feel them slipping away. And once he loses control over someone's life, that is when he gets triggered, and his triggers are violent. I just find this man very terrifying because when he gets angry, he gets violent, and there is no stop to it, and he will stop at nothing. What's even more terrifying is that he doesn't see his behavior as harmful. If he calls you all hours of the night and he is just yelling at you, following you, showing up at your workplace, he doesn't think that he's harming this person. He's just trying to convince them and have a conversation, which isn't the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth, you know? He doesn't really think about the harm he does to others because he's completely deluded to the fact. And all of this stress happened to his ex-girlfriend, Rachel. But let's get into John's backstory. His upbringing wasn't harmful at all. It wasn't awful. He had, two parents that loved him. His dad was very much in his life. He was taught how to hunt. He did a lot of sports in school. He was, quite popular among his peers. And he lived in a small town in Illinois called DeKalb County. I know I said that wrong and I'm so sorry. But regardless, he was a very sporty, energetic young man. However, as he became a teenager in middle school, he would, develop relationships with a few girls there, and he made sure and he kept reassuring them that, please don't break my heart. I am in for the long haul. I'm not trying to mess you about. But he was getting a bit controlling. So he kept reassuring his girlfriend, like, oh, by the way, please don't break my heart. Don't break my heart. I love you and it's the real thing. I don't want you to go anywhere. I just don't want things to change. So in 2015, Rachel met John in a blind date. The two hit it off. Rachel described him as witty and funny. And John, as soon as he set eyes on Rachel, he was like, this is my wife. This is the mother of my children, and she isn't going anywhere. However, Rachel wasn't looking for a long-term relationship because she was working 3 jobs and she was booked and busy. She was hardly home. I could just imagine how exhausted she is. And she had her head on the swivel. She was working hard to provide for her child, She had bills to pay, so the last thing she wanted was a relationship, but she was open on meeting new people. I mean, at the beginning, when John and Rachel were together, things were great, and before you know it, things were going downhill. However, John did work as a diesel mechanic, and he was also working long hours, and the two hardly seen each other. You know, they could hardly meet up in person, so most of their relationship at the beginning was through text and call. But Rachel did notice something about John. She noticed that he was drinking almost every day. He had friends that were taking him astray, you know. He was partying every night. He was up all night. He was surrounded by young women, just partying, doing drugs, and being irresponsible. So Rachel's getting a bit put off with his lifestyle choices. And with that said, she was thinking, maybe this isn't something that I want to pursue. However, John was adamant. So Rachel's son, Gage, was only 3 years old when she was dating John. And the two were, they called their relationship as dumb love. There was something about John that Rachel couldn't let go of. This is my own personal opinion, but I think John was very good at manipulating Rachel, He knew what to say and what not to say. Rachel would explain on the documentary that when John is arguing with her or she's arguing with him, he would just show up at 11 o'clock at night outside of her house unannounced and trying to persuade her that he is sorry and he wants to work on things, and he was just trying to take control of the situation. He wouldn't give her like a day or two to think about the argument, to, really process what's happening. But once John wanted to apologize, he is going to apologize, and you have to accept it then and there. So as months passed, Rachel found out she was pregnant with her second child. So once Rachel found out she was pregnant, they moved to Arkansas, and in November 2016, their son Jax was born. However, something terrible has happened. 4-year-old Gage was killed in a freak accident caused by John. So John was driving a loading tractor to remove fallen trees, and Gage was sitting beside him helping him out. However, John was, collecting the fallen trees and everything, and he wasn't concentrating, and Gage fell out of the tractor. And as John was driving the tractor, he ran over Gage by accident. And Rachel saw the whole thing happen. She ran to him and she held Gage in her arms as he was suffering, dying, bleeding out, and it was too late. The ambulance couldn't come in time, and unfortunately, Gage has passed away. John and Rachel became two different people, and the love that they had for each other started to die. Rachel literally shut it down, She recently had a baby, she lost her other one, and she couldn't take care of Jax anymore. She couldn't hold him. She was just grieving. John decided to take over and support her as much as he could. However, he turned to drugs. He was a heavy meth user. He was smoking crack, and he was just slowly turning insane. So remember the obsessive behaviors I've mentioned at the beginning? When John was on meth, it was heightened and he started to hallucinate. Obviously, John blamed himself for what has happened and he was just trying to numb his pain. But I'm not excusing heavy drug use. But once something very traumatic happens, you're going to look for short-term comfort because the pain is just so unbearable. But as everything unfolded, they both fell apart. However, Rachel didn't use substances to numb her pain. She was just processing everything in her head. So in 2017, Rachel and John moved to a bigger home in Arkansas, and this is where everything became worse. So John found work as a mechanic in a nearby garage, and this is where he met a 19-year-old woman. Her details are anonymous, I don't know. However, he decided to have an affair. He slept with the 19-year-old. So Rachel found out about the affair, I don't know how, and she was not happy about it at all. However, John was all apologetic all over again and he wanted to make amends, but Rachel was like, no, it's over between us, and John could not take no for an answer. He was like, we belong together. I want to fix this relationship. You know, I love you. I don't want you to go anywhere, blah, blah, blah. And Rachel was like, no, 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 no. So this is where John hits Rachel right in the face. This is the first time that John placed his hands on her and he punched her right in the face. So John literally snapped and started punching Rachel in the ribs, in the face, in the arms. It was just a frenzied attack. After he was done and he realized what he has done, he takes Rachel's car keys and gets into the van and drives, and he's out all night. He probably went to a bar to drink his worries away. I'm not sure. So John also grew increasingly paranoid. He would leave his phone behind and he would press record and try to listen in to all of the recordings. And Rachel would be at home with the TV on. She would probably be cleaning, cooking, just minding her own business. And he would hear a man's voice in the recordings and he would be like, who's that in my house? He goes back to Rachel and completely accuses her of having an affair, even though he was the one having the affair. So with that said, Rachel was like, the TV was on, there's nobody here. And in another occasion, John recorded her yet again without her consent, and he accused her of, sneaking a man through the garage into the house. And I'm thinking, nobody's in the house, but it was the TV that was on, or maybe she briefly spoke to the postman. I don't know. But Rachel was not having an affair. So John was consuming meth on a daily basis and he was just hallucinating, hearing voices, going out of his mind. He's up all night drinking and he just became unhinged. So on October 2018, Rachel had enough. She takes her son Jax and she just leaves the house. She goes all the way back. She drives 600 miles all the way back to Illinois and she stays with her mom. She literally disappeared in the middle of the night and John woke up and was like, oh, where's Rachel? Where's my family? And he felt so sad, like, I have lost my family all over again, and he wanted to see his son again. So he was asking Rachel's family and friends in Arkansas, like, oh, have you heard from Rachel? She isn't answering me. She's gone missing. I don't know where she is. And everybody was just wasting his time saying, oh, she's over there. Oh, I think she'll be back in a few days. Nothing to worry about. He knew they were lying on her behalf. So John couldn't take the rejection. He was like, I'm going to get her back. And he will do anything to get her attention. And let me tell you what he did. Absolutely unforgivable in my books. What he did was so unforgivable. So John sends text messages. I have Gage. I have his ashes. I am going to put one scoop at a time into the toilet until you answer my calls, my texts, and so on. He was threatening to abuse the remains of her son just to get her back, just to regain control of her life again. He said, do you think I'm lying? I don't give a F anymore, Rachel. And he sent her videos of him pouring ashes down the toilet. And I think he actually did it. It wasn't a lie. Rachel had enough and she got an immediate restraining order against John. So going back a little bit, in 2006, John had multiple claims of controlling behavior against multiple relationships he was in when he was younger. And I am very convinced that people don't change. So Rick Anderson, he's the only family member that is talking to John, and he realized that John has such obsessive behavior, and he mentioned that John was married before and he cheated on his newlywed wife on their wedding day. All of John's criminal behavior was published and sent out to the public, and I'm assuming that John's family read every single crime that he has committed, hence why they all cut him off. So Judy, Rachel's mom, she knew that John was completely out of his mind and he was planning to murder Rachel. He was thinking, if I have no control, then if I can't have you, nobody else can. So John would call Judy and tell her, "Oh, where's Rachel? I know she's there. Pick up the phone. Tell her to call me. Give me Rachel right now, you stupid effing bitch." And he would just start cursing at her. And she was just getting stressed out. And she was so worried for her daughter. I mean, could you imagine being in that situation? So John finds out that Rachel is in her mother's house and he drove over 600 miles. It was a good 8 to 9 hour drive and he winded up going right outside of Judy's home trying to break in. And it was absolutely insane. Judy was so upset because Rachel told her son Jax if he ever sees his father, he has to hide. He has to run and hide. It was absolutely heartbreaking for a child to be prepared for the worst. And it's just, I don't know what to say to that. So security camera footage captured John walking outside of a warehouse where Rachel worked. And at this particular warehouse, there was no gates or security locks or anything. And John could just walk right in. So he basically drove there and he was waiting for Rachel to come out. Rachel then spots him and she immediately gets scared. Because Rachel is frightened and he could see that on her face, he was immediately triggered. He was angry. He was so mad, like, how could you be afraid of me? I'm trying to get you back kind of thing. And John goes 0 to 100 really quick. So she sees John just sprinting towards her and Rachel runs and hides inside of her truck. She locks the doors and John is just punching outside of the windows and everything. And he managed to get the passenger side window open and he opens the door. He manages to get into the car. And Rachel just runs and she sees a group of men and she's telling them, oh, call the police. She's screaming. She's asking for help, screaming for help. And it was intense. So a group of these men pinned John down, tried to de-escalate the situation, and the police were called. So the police came and they arrested John and, that was the end of that. However, more things happened. I forgot to mention that John was trying to run over Rachel as soon as he saw her, but he was unsuccessful. John was then charged with violating his protection order and was held in jail. Rachel felt like she's finally free, and in April 2019, he pleaded guilty to aggravated DUI and stalking. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. John was also prohibited from contacting Rachel and their son. Rachel then received letters from John on a weekly basis. She never responded back to him, but at the very least, he was very apologetic in those letters. So in February 2021, John legally challenged the no contact order that Rachel has against him so he could see his son Jax. And Rachel couldn't afford to contest it, and the order was modified. John could visit Jax on weekends. On November 15th, 2021, John was released on parole. He only served 2.5 years in prison. He didn't even do the full 6 years. Rachel is very concerned that John might kidnap Jax and get back into heavy drug use again, but only time can tell. There is a chance that he could relapse and become a very dangerous person. John made claims that people do change and you have to just give them a chance. So Rachel decided to give him one last chance for the sake of their son. So John claims that he's a different person now and he has changed his ways and he wants to be with his family. And with that said, this brings us to the end of today's case. What do you guys think of today's story? Do you really think people can change after all that has happened? Please do let me know your thoughts down below. Till then, please do stay safe and hydrated, and I'll see you guys again in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.